Welcome to everybody to our first AMA. Ask Me Anything, Q&A, call it whatever you prefer. Our special guest today is the artist, creator, and writer Sarah Zucker. So welcome, Sarah. It's a pleasure having you here again because I know you already took part to our BCA residency program last year, last cohort. Well, it was last year. So yeah, welcome back. And I think it would be great to start this Q&A session with a little introduction of yourself. So yeah, go ahead if you want to.
Sure. Hi. Thank you for the welcome. Thank you all for tuning in. My name is Sarah Zucker, aka The Sarah Show. I am an artist who works with all sorts of fun things, but I've become quite known for the interplay of cutting edge and obsolete technologies. I do a lot of work with vintage video equipment and VHS and analog video and mixing that with newer technologies to create a delightful dimension of my own creation. I have been involved in crypto art since April of 2019. So I've seen some stuff, guys. Been here long enough to see this all kind of develop and bring us to where we are today. So that's me.
Great. So guys, don't be shy. I read on the chat that some of you are shy right now, but don't worry. And if you want to start asking Sarah a question or just unmute, yeah, exactly. Go.
Hello.
Dylan.
Um, I guess my first question is, how have you, the way that you view the space, like how has that changed over time, and how is it, what are the main differences you see nowadays in comparison to, you've been in this for a couple of years now. So just like, I guess, how do you visualize the space, and what are your general thoughts on how it's progressing?
Yeah, that's a great question. My friend, the artist Matt Kane, had a great tweet about this. That, gosh, I think I think is from like the beginning of last year at this point. So it was already applicable back then. But uh, he said something to the effect of like when this all began, it was sort of like Pangea. The idea, the theory that exists that all the continents of the Earth were once all one big unified continent before they broke apart. And even at the beginning of 2021, he said that we were starting to experience continental drift. And this thing that was once sort of a unified thing, which is what I think people refer to when they use the term crypto art now. Of course, I see that term still being used, but I think it's more appropriate almost to refer to an era that's now past when we all kind of it's not that we all knew each other, but you could like see the bounds of the space. You could look around and kind of understand, okay, we have these few little platforms and there are only so many people doing this. And the whole thing was very arcane. And any of us, trying to explain it to other people in our lives, they would have scratched their heads and been like, what are you talking about? So it was pretty niche at the beginning, and it was very it was not elegant yet. It was not built out yet. It was like we were all in this primordial soup trying to figure out best practices, and it's kind of wild to me to see how little ideas any one of us came up with back then, that they've like had the butterfly effect of echoing out and becoming these almost like monolithic ways things are done now. And it's like, things like the Coldy method, for example, of like this way of running auctions and extending the timer at the end. And it was this way of doing auctions that Coldy came up with that was very beneficial to artists. And now you see it's just a given, right? It's just a given that platforms, like, that's how they run auctions now. And or even just the existence of royalties. Like, to speak of Matt Kane again, he and a group of artists, they really spearheaded the development of royalties for artists in I want to say late 2019 or early 2020. And that's something that the traditional art market, like, or the traditional art world, like, artists have been fighting for that for like 100 years, like in the traditional art market, a way of getting royalties on secondary sales of their work, because the whole thinking of that is that artists work so hard to create value around their work, but then there's this sort of like extractive element of only collectors benefiting from that. And so that was something that, again, was not there at the beginning, and it took artists like inventing that to make that happen and now be something that we really hold to. And of course now, I view early 2021, probably the Beeple sale at Christie's in February of 2021, is what I'd call like the event horizon, where we were all these little creatures hiding in darkness. Nobody knew what we were up to, and suddenly, the world lifted the rock, and we all had to scurry out into the sunshine. Like, now, any person you meet knows what an NFT is, and they did not know that prior to a year ago. So that's one thing that's different, is that what we are doing now is now much more seen, much more known. And of course, an effect of that is that there is backlash. There's quite a lot of backlash. There's quite a lot of cultural hand-wringing around what we're doing here. And that is not something that that any of us, I certainly didn't foresee it. To me, NFTs felt very just like, of course, you know what I mean? Of course, you should be able to edition digital artwork. I had personally been waiting for the development of NFTs since around 2014, 2015, when people, when artists first started experimenting with using blockchain for art editioning. So it honestly took me a bit by surprise how angry it made people. So that's different. And of course, there is, with that wider knowledge and wider visibility, the space has grown beyond even just continental drift. Now it's like this entire cosmos, and you certainly cannot see the bounds of it anymore. And we're in this moment where the thing about this technology is that it is available to everyone. And I think part of developing a technology is that everything has to be tried. You know what I mean? But that has also made it so that it's gotten into the hands of people who maybe don't have the best of intentions, or I should say, who are looking to extract and not looking to build. And I think, you hear a lot of folks talking about this and debating this within the space of like the proliferation of the 10K projects. I'm still chewing on how I feel about all of it. I think, again, everything has to be tried, but I do think it can be very demoralizing to those of us who work in the realm of what I would call fine art. It's demoralizing to be conflated with something that's has a very different place than what you do. And it's demoralizing to see money get thrown at things that you sort of understand are designed to be extractive, designed to be essentially gambling mechanisms. Even though, of course, we acknowledge there's speculation in art too. So it's even that I'm careful ever to draw too finite of a line between the two things. But we're really in this moment that I think a lot of the backlash is about things that we as artists aren't even necessarily participating in, or aren't necessarily aligned with. And it's yet another moment of definition. It's another moment of sort of like, we'll see how it all goes. There have been many such waves within this space, and it's always mutating. It mutates very fast. So I guess that's my take on where it was and where it is now.
Thank you so much for that answer. That was very interesting and quite illuminating as well.
Hey, Sarah, thanks so much for doing this. I'm really a huge fan of your work. To piggyback on that, are you feeling more positive with like the way things are going? I like the way that you called out that there is in like Web3 as a whole is tended to be a bit of a sort of pushback against the sort of Web 2 and that extraction mechanisms that exist, not just for artists, but just for like the population at large. It was interesting to hear you say that in a lot of ways, some of these like NFT projects, in a little bit more, are in their own way extracted, but in a very different way. So like hearing that, are you being a bit more positive, a little bit more negative, like really in the middle, but where world in an art sort of central view is going?
Sure. You're cutting out there a little bit for me, but I think I got the gist of what your question was. I'm a bit of a pragmatic Cheshire cat. It's to say that I really I can see like facets of everything, right? And so it's to say that I feel both optimistic and pessimistic in some ways. And what I mean by that is, um, I recently watched a documentary about the .com boom, specifically it featured like the pets.com sock puppet and sort of the hype cycle of that moment in Web 1, I guess we'd call it. And I couldn't help but like hear these people, who were employees at like Netscape and Yahoo, and hearing them talk about it all in retrospect and feeling like they were saying words that I myself might say about some of the things we see right now. And yet, I think everyone can acknowledge the internet did not go away after the burst of the .com bubble. The wild speculative activity definitely had a moment of reckoning and definitely shook out a lot of the stuff that at that time that was a cash grab, and that was, a lot of promise of value built on nothing. That's what the story of the .com burst, I would say, in a nutshell, is people were building things and everyone knew this thing they're building is nothing. It's not real, but they are riding this huge wave right now where anything remotely involved in the internet was able to be hugely funded. And so it's to say that my take on it as, someone who came to this as I've been an artist for a long time before I got involved with all of this, and I began editioning my work in this way because it felt to me like the obligatory moment, as they'd call it in playwriting, like the Chekhov's gun, so to speak, for my artwork, which was that I've always made, or not always, but for a long time had made screen-based and net art. And I knew, like I said, I'd been waiting a long time for this way of editioning my artwork and developing a collector base based on my own experiences in the traditional art market. And so it's to say it's why I think it's important to make a distinction between fine art and collectibles, even though I acknowledge that you cannot make a really finite distinction. There's absolutely a continuum between these two things. But it's to say that, yes, what I witness absolutely strikes me as unchecked speculative activity. There's a lot going on that it is like, if I thought it was wild a year ago, I mean, it's like on steroids now, that people are, the way they referred to it in this .com documentary I was watching is that it's a lot of dumb money. And what that means, it's not to say people are dumb. It's to say that it's the way the money is flowing is based purely on hype and not based on facts or not based on actual products or anything like that. And so I do think that, especially for artists, and I am the Lorax, I speak for the artists. I'm in this really always sort of advocating for artists as a group, and for our needs as a group. And my biggest advice, or my biggest, I don't even want to say advice, my biggest sort of like thing I would put out there to my fellow artists is do what you can to build a market while also recognizing that this is an incredibly volatile space. And there are things you can do now to make sure that your personal market around your artwork can survive. I mean, maybe not survive completely unharmed, but can survive a crash or a huge change in the overall ecosystem that we are a small part of, and that's what I mean by we can't separate ourselves from collectibles, because there's absolutely a lot of crossover, and we are affected by that market too. And so things you can do, what I mean by that, examples of that, and I'm thinking specifically of like there were artists, when the Great Recession hit in like 2008, 2009, that really hit the art market. And there were a lot of artists who had been really like raising their prices too fast in a sort of inorganic way, and it wiped out their markets completely, because people suddenly having less money across the board of like the entire economy made it so these super hyped artists just couldn't sustain then. And so I think one of the number one things artists can do to survive a crash like that is you have to be so thoughtful about pricing, and you have to be so thoughtful about edition sizes and editioning. Um, you know, uh, I know there's a lot of different takes on scarcity, and it is not a one size fits all model for anyone. Every single artist working in this space has to figure it out for themselves. But it is to say that like you have to check your own adrenaline, and you have to check your own desire to go, wow, I can just keep making more and more and more money. That's exciting to anyone, of course. That's human nature, right? But you have to have certain principles in place that act as a cooling agent, so that you don't accidentally overinflate your own market. Because the best thing you can do for yourself is make sure the growth of your market is organic and not being pumped, because markets that are pumped are the ones that are being set up to crash. So I hope that answers your question.
Totally. No, that's really interesting. I've never really heard of it being called as a market in the form of like, there's a market for collectibles, there's a market even for PFP projects and all of that sort of world. But I've never really thought about a market for like your own or my own, in that matter, like artwork that I'm putting out. So it's interesting to hear it in that way. You mentioned a few, and I don't want to use up everyone's time here, but you mentioned a few sort of things about like editions and like cadence of release. Is there any other sort of like just concepts to be aware of, not necessarily giving specific advice, but concepts to be aware of for helping to sort of create and even think about your work in a market type of way?
Oh, absolutely. My God, we could fill a whole day with just this. I am a sponge of tidbits learned through, probably largely through my own failure.
Amazing. Please. Yeah, that'd be
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah, that's how we learn things, right? By doing them the wrong way. So yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that's like sort of a new concept to you, the idea of like a market around your own personal work. And I would say that's the starting point for anyone looking to get involved. I mean, whether it's here in NFTs, or even if you're just looking to sell your work, physical artwork. And I always, look, I want to give you all information that's going to be really, really useful. So what I'll say is forgive me in advance that this is going to be a little bit like of a financial approach, which I still, as an artist, makes me feel a little like a dog walking on my hind legs, like makes me feel a little uncomfortable, because we've all been sort of socialized to not talk about money. It's one of the many ways in which artists as a class are kept out of wealth and kept out of sort of benefiting from our own labor, is that historically the art market has made it considered very socially untoward for artists to talk about money. We're not supposed to ever dirty our hands with the selling of our artwork. That's what gallerists are supposed to be for, and you'll see a lot of the backlash that's coming from the traditional art market right now is all around that, is this attacking of artists for daring to sell their own work. So again, I'll preface that by saying that please please forgive me for this being money talk, but I think we have to talk about this stuff. It's what benefits us. So yes, the first thing you have to think about is that what you are doing here is creating a market for your work. If this is what you choose to engage in, if you're choosing to sell NFT editions, and to recognize that you are then therefore the sort of like the god of that of realm. You are the creator. You are the only entity who can add things to that ecosystem, right? And so again, I was sort of saying there are a lot of debates around scarcity, and a lot of people get very worked up about scarcity. I'm of the mindset that you should never let how you sell and what you sell dictate what you create. I believe you should create freely and create what you want to create. Don't create with the business in mind. I like to say that the inner child is the one who should show up to create, and the inner babysitter is the one who should show up to the business meetings. And if either of them goes to the wrong place, you're going to have trouble. So it's keeping that in mind that you don't have full control over the ecosystem, but there's a lot that you control, and specifically what you control is the supply, and for any artist, again, I think it's sort of criminal that they don't teach business in art school because the basic fundamentals of how markets work are at play here, right? There is a thing called supply and demand, and if you create too much supply and there's not enough demand, then a market collapses. Then you have these issues, and I'm sure artists who've been doing this a little while, if they oversupply, they face these moments where they realize it kills their secondary market, where their artwork it loses value, right? Because there's too much of it available and not enough people who want to buy it. And then they sort of lose the faith of their collectors in a certain way. And so that's something to think about. And to that, speaking about collectors, to that end, especially if you're at the earlier part of this journey, it's intoxicating to sell your work to collectors. There's no doubt it is a sublime feeling. And I'm not even speaking about the obvious, like, oh, you receive support and that feels really good. I'm talking about something that's almost more metaphysical than that a stranger would want to part with their money, which is something we hold of such high value in our society. For a stranger to want to part with their money in order to acquire your artwork, like it's intoxicating. There's no greater feeling. So I wish that for all of you, and it's something to cherish, because it's a really beautiful moment when that happens. But you're also well served, again, to be shrewd and to recognize that there are people, everyone has reasons for doing what they're doing in this space, and people move around with a lot of different intentions. And the best advice I can give you is to be thoughtful about selling your work to as wide a group of people as you can. And why I say that is that there is a very, especially with a market like that we have now, where we have way more artists who are minting NFTs than we have collectors who are buying NFTs. That has been true since the beginning, and it is only increasingly exponentially true now. Artists get wind of this, and it's no surprise that people get wind of what's going on here, and they want in. I would be the first to say to any artist, yeah, you should try to see what's going on here and see if you can make space for yourself here. But that fact remains, and because the collectors are more scarce than the artists, they wield a lot of power. And so there is this trap that exists for artists where you might have a collector who, for whatever reason, decides they want to collect you, sort of like maybe not just your art, but they want to collect you, and they will buy up a lot of your artwork. And when you have not been selling your art, that sounds like a dream come true. That sounds like, oh my God, are you kidding me? This person's going to buy like so many of my pieces all at once. I'm going to make so much more money than I've ever made. That's amazing. That's amazing. And the problem with that down the line then is that that person controls like a huge percentage of your market then. And so then you've a little bit given away your stake in your own market to one person. And it might be fine. Sometimes people do that just because they truly are like they love to support culture. But sometimes it's not fine. And in the time I've been doing this, I've seen how there have been collectors who have really strong-armed the artists they collect, or have made the artists they collect. If those artists feel completely reliant on that one collector, that artist can then maybe lose credibility in the eyes of others because people go, well, they're just owned by so-and-so, like they're their little lapdog. And again, I'm not referencing anyone specifically. I'm making a very sort of grand observation. And again, this is in no way part of like NFT culture. This is part of life. This is part of this is capitalism, right? This is how it works. And so that's just something I would put out there for people. And it's not to say you should freak out if you're like, oh no, that's me. I have one person who's collected. We all have that. We all have one or two, we all have some collectors who just have a lot more of our work than others. That's fine. It's just to say, be shrewd and think about your future self and protect your future interests. And it's the same reason why I would point out to people, we all get started, and often at the beginning we're just selling our work to our friends, and that's amazing, and we support our friends in that way. And it's why I've been clear, or I try to be clear with artists that it's that you don't want one collector to keep buying all your work, because it's also that it then looks to people like it just doesn't look like a healthy market, right? It looks like one person pumping that market. And even if that's not what's going on, it's just not as promising as when you see, wow, all these different people bought that artist's work. That means there's huge demand across a wide group of people for that artist's work. It just is a signal to people that like that artist's value, the value of their art is going up. And even for me, right? Like I'm a collector as well, and I really primarily collect just because I love art. I love artists. I love supporting artists. It's been one of the great joys of my life that this space has made it possible for me to support other artists. I don't buy with any intention of like quickly reselling the work, but even I just for my own like financial well-being, I don't want to buy things that I think will lose all their value, that it's like there are all these little ways that artists indicate that they are building value, right? And the best way to learn all those things is to, be on Twitter, watch what people are doing, watch people as they become more and more successful and think, well, what are they doing? And are there some of the tactics they're using? Do I think those would apply to me? Do I think that would work for me? Is that a way to build value for my work? One that's been coming up for me lately that I have noticed, as like I said, I've been here for a long 3 years and have seen waves of people come in and then leave, right? This is a very stimulating space to be a part of. I would not say that it's for everyone. I would say it really hijacks our adrenaline system. And I've seen a lot of artists who come in and they come in burning real bright at the beginning. They're guns a-blazing at the beginning, doing all this stuff, releasing new editions every day, whatever it is, where you feel that it's like, wow, they are really just doing the most. And then 2 months later, they're just gone. They're just not doing anything anymore. And the problem with that, for me, I'll say from a collector's perspective, the problem with that is artists who do not keep working in this space are no longer developing value for their work. And even if it was work that was really, really hyped at the time of its release, if that artist evaporates and stops creating work, then there's no secondary market because they've left the chat, so to speak. They've left the conversation. And so if I may give a bit of advice, like one piece of advice I'd give is from the get-go, be really thoughtful about like mint cadence, release cadence, like which means how often you release work, and be thoughtful in a way that means don't set yourself up at a pace that's unsustainable, that's going to burn you out so that you're going to have to leave. You're much better off going slowly, releasing work less regularly if it means you're going to be able to build. Because also once you get your footing and once you start having that experience of, oh, the thing I'm doing is working now, because you can't expect that at the beginning. Like I said, for every single one of us, you have to try stuff that doesn't work to figure out what will work for you. And you'll know it when you hit it because it'll feel different. You'll be like, whoa, I suddenly sold out of that edition or whatever it is. And then once you've found what works, then you can kind of adjust a little bit. And maybe even in time, you can raise your prices a little bit. That's another sort of rookie error I've seen people make where they sell out, their first edition sells out, and they go, that was amazing. So then they double the price for their next edition, and then that sells out. And then they go, I know, I'll double the price again for the third edition. And then they're going, scratching their head when the third edition doesn't sell at all, going, why didn't that sell? And it's because even if the prices are low, even if you feel the work is well priced, you're sending a sort of subtextual signal to collectors that you're greedy. Like that's how they interpret it. I'm not saying that that's what the artist necessarily is, but it sends this signal that says, like, I'm just going to keep raising my prices. And again, it scares people off because again, it indicates that you're setting your market up for a crash. And while it smarts those moments where something doesn't work and doesn't sell or whatever it is, you have to take those moments and as the gift that they are, because they are trying to tell you something. They're telling you some piece of it isn't working. And sometimes the piece of it that isn't working is the market as a whole. Sometimes the platform you're selling on is dead, or Ethereum just had a huge drop, or whatever it is. There are all the time things that are going to happen that'll be way beyond your scope of control, that have nothing to do with the quality of your art, that have nothing to do with the way in which you chose to release your art. And so sometimes that's the lesson, and it sucks. It's not a fun lesson to get, but sometimes you have to be reminded, like, that you're meeting chaos halfway, that you really don't hold all the chips, and you just have to learn to surf the waves.
Great answer. Thank you so much for that. And all the advice, like, don't hold back. I think we're all here for it.
Thank you so much. So far, can you hear me well?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yeah, amazing. Hi, name is Anna. Um, Amazing hearing you talk about markets and addressing that and being so open about that. Also quite relatable, or recognizable. My question is, how have you been able to be here for 3 years and not burn out? Because I've been here since August, and it's exhausting at times.
Oh, Anna, sweet Anna. I am burnt out. I don't know. I think I've learned how to live in a state of burnout. Yeah, it's a really good question, and I wish I had a better answer for you than that. It's very tricky because, like I was saying, I think even I feel that sense of, like, this space moves so fast and things develop so fast that I think it is natural to feel like you can't leave. I think of it almost like New York City on on steroids. I feel like I've used that analogy too many times, but I used to live in New York City, and that as my experience of the city is, if you live there and then you leave and you come back a few years later and it is shocking. It is like existentially challenging to come back to a thriving metropolis like New York City and realize how much it changed and grew while you were gone, and that it didn't wait for you. You know what I mean? And this space is that, but even more intensely, that even if you take like a week or two off and come back and you're like, whoa, everything is different and I don't know how anything works now. So my answer to that, it's a little bit what I was speaking about before, because I have absolutely, even in the past year, I've seen so many people who really got involved in this last spring who are already gone, you know, who already had to tap out because, like I said, it's too stimulating. It's like being in a casino or like the Las Vegas Strip with all the flashing lights going off all the time. So my advice is that you have, at least this is what I'm trying to do, is like radical self-care and making space for yourself regularly to unplug. Better to take a day to unplug here or there than to have to like leave permanently or leave for several months on end, because it will be a lot. You can't expect it to just wait for you when you come back. That is just the truth of it. I see a lot of posts about this of people saying it's okay, people sort of mental health focused posts saying it is okay to leave. And of course it's okay to leave. But the flip side of it being okay to leave is you also have to know that the world doesn't revolve around you, and that if you leave, things will move on without you. So that is what I have found it keeps me going. Is I'm very dedicated to my yoga practice. I'm like religious about practicing yoga. I'm trying to be very dedicated to a meditation practice, so I find that a little trickier for me. And like develop other hobbies that aren't this. Like I love to cook. There are things that I have to do sometimes where it's like it cannot be about this. And part of that for me is that my art was always such a huge part of my life. And while I was a working artist, I also wasn't, for a very long time, it wasn't like my art was this hugely demanding career. And so that has really shifted for me in the past couple years, that it has become a very demanding career. And so, yeah, it's learning how to do regular self-care, learning to unplug regularly when you need it. I use an app called Freedom that lets me create block lists for my phone. So I will use it, like if I need to write, I'm a writer, so sometimes I need to write, and Twitter is like the enemy of writing, because you are like programmed to get your little dopamine rush and look at Twitter. So I use this app Freedom quite regularly, where I go, do not let me look at Twitter for like 4 hours. And it will literally block Twitter from my phone and my computer so that I cannot pull it up. I find that's very helpful. And I also find a really, really important aspect of not being burnt out to the point that you have to dip out is just finding friends in the space who, there is stuff every day I see that bothers me, or that that I just, there's this, we're in sort of the epicenter of something that I think is an indicator of a larger cultural reckoning that's happening right now. And so every day we're seeing everyone's hot take about NFTs from so many different sectors of life. And it's a lot for us to shoulder. Artists are typically very sensitive people. So I have found that having friends within the space, like trusted confidants within the space, who I can chat with, who I can compare notes with, that's not just about not getting burnt out. That's also about protecting yourself, that making sure you don't get scammed, making sure you don't get, there are a lot of scams that go around that target artists, and having people that you can reach out to and say, hey, I got this email about this opportunity. They mentioned your name. Is it real? Are you really doing that? Because that's a big scam that goes around, and they'll name drop other people. And you should always like have people that you can reach out to and again, just make sure things are real, make sure things are what they present themselves as, but also just people that are confidants that you can that you trust, that you can maybe vent to a little bit. That helps a lot. Also therapy. If you're making money from NFTs, spend it on therapy. I tweeted about that last year that like, help, I need a therapist who knows what NFTs are. And at that time, NFTs were only just kind of becoming understood in mainstream consciousness. And now, thankfully, it took me a year, but I found one. That now therapists know what NFTs are. So I just like highly recommend that because, again, like I said, it's not that you're not allowed to take a break, but you have to be pragmatic about it, and you have to be honest with yourself that people in high pressure careers, you don't really get the option to take a break and not have things not have there be consequences of that. That's all I guess I'll say about that. So I hope that helped, Anna.
Yeah, that's great. I love the mix between like very tangible things and more, bigger thoughts on this answer. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
We have one question on our residency chat. I don't know if you can see it, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the chat is. Where it
Okay,
lives.
okay. If you want, I can. Okay, it's the 3B, like residency third.
Oh, I see it. Okay,
So, yeah.
gotcha.
So, yeah, we have a question from Luis. It's quite long, so that's why I ask you to
I
take a
see.
look at it. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. I'll read it out here so that people know what I'm responding
Thank you.
to. Yeah, Luis asked, how do you think your humor has been taken by the art community? The playful approach, even the VHS look. I am a cartoonist and artist too. Do you think it would be good to develop some serious side, more academic? This is from Ricardo from Mexico. And he noted that I have a solid academic career and background, which is fabulous. Thank you, Ricardo. Yes, I do. I have an MFA, but it's not in art. It is in dramatic writing. Funny enough. So yeah, it's funny. I was just talking about this with my friend, the artist Edgar Fabian Frias, yesterday, and I highly recommend following Edgar if you don't already. They are a delight of a human and a really unique artist. We were talking about it because both of us are very playful in our artwork. And it's something we have really noted that there is this sort of mistaken assumption that playful artwork can't be deep, or that humorous artwork is somehow not as important as deep, hard-hitting artwork. And I chew on this a lot because I think it's a problem in culture as a whole, and it's nothing new. But I've talked about this in other chats I've done, where I, for a very long time, was a script reader in Hollywood. That was how I made ends meet for many years when I wasn't getting enough commissions to support myself. So I've read like hundreds and hundreds of screenplays by aspiring screenwriters. And something I really took away from that experience is how often people conflate shock value or shock with value. They equate shock means it is important. And what I mean by that is, it has to be about hard, heavy, terrible things like assault and murder, and that means it is serious artwork. And my feeling on that is that shock is just one of many tools that those of us who express ourselves for a living have at our disposal. And I think shock, when wielded really thoughtfully, can of course be incredibly impactful and make for very potent artwork. But I think that humor wielded thoughtfully can be just as impactful and just as deep. It's to say that I've known from the get-go that my art, which is very playful, which is even childlike at times, very intentionally, that it's not for everyone, and that it isn't going to hit everyone as deep, meaningful artwork, that some folks might take it in and toss it aside. And again, the use of VHS, the use very intentionally for me of aesthetics that are sometimes associated with with ephemera and with, by being a GIF artist for so long, that working with these things that we do think of as just like internet detritus. And so my answer to that is that you have to make the art you make, that this is an opportunity for all artists to make the art they make and find new support for it. But what is happening with a lot of folks, and not even necessarily artists, is they're not seeing it as an opportunity to make the art they make and find support for it. They're seeing it as an opportunity to come up with whatever they can come up with that will pander to people to make the most money. And the thing about that is that that's an option, of course. If you want to just make money, this is, yes, a space you can come in, you can see what people are doing to make money, and you can just copy them and make your own money. But speaking for myself and what I perceive that a lot of the artists in the space are also sort of wrestling with is the fact that to make the art you make is this grand act of vulnerability. It exposes you to the world, right? There is like nothing that makes you more vulnerable than being creative and then showing it to the world. And for myself, I really didn't sell my work very well for like the first over a year, that I was doing this. Like 2019, I sold my work, but it wasn't going for big numbers. None of us were really selling for very big numbers in that first year, but I wasn't seeing the support even that some of the other artists were seeing. And it was actually Jason Bailey in January of 2020 who kind of discovered me, discovered my art, bought a few pieces, and then did me the huge honor of tweeting about my work and telling people like, no, this artist is doing something really interesting, really unique from everything else that's here, that she comes from this lineage that makes sense in an art historical context. And at that point, every single piece I had unsold, you sold immediately. And from that point on, it's really snowballed for me, right? And that's incredible. And I wish that moment for everyone here. I wish that moment where someone who has the power to do that connects with your work and gives you that gift of sharing it with the world in a way that gives other collectors who maybe aren't as confident to find new artists, that gives them permission, like, no, you really should look at this artist and support them. And why I bring that up is that it's a conversation I had with myself early on, because even back then I was seeing my art is not themed around cryptocurrency, because again, I came into this already with a long-standing art practice. And while I'm very interested in cryptocurrency, it's just not what my art is about, right? It's not what I really directly work with as subject matter. And I saw early on how it was like, well, I could make this change. I could just start making my art be about cryptocurrency, and then I would sell it a lot better. And I'm not saying I didn't try. I have one piece. If you look, you'll find it. Where I tried it. You have to try things. And I'm always someone who's like, there's really no black and white. I don't believe in moral righteousness like that. But it is to say that I just felt like, pandering to make money is not what is going to allow me to build a long-standing art practice that is true to my voice. And in the end, that is how you end up getting burnt out and getting sort of forced out, is because if it's not built on your true gift and your true unique thing you have to share with the world, then you might be able to make some sales, but I think you'll find it very hard to sustain that. I think you'll find it very hard to sustain working outside of what it is you're actually called to put into this world. And again, like I said, if the goal really is just make money, then you can create a framework that panders to the dominant tropes of what people are buying, and you'll do quite well, you know? And I'm not even knocking that. Like I would just want people to make their lives work a little better, you know? We artists have been so traumatized as a class of people by being sort of at the bottom of the social hierarchy for so long. And yet, the entirety of Web 2, the entirety of the social media era was all hinged on our labor, and that we were sort of providing everything that made social media worth going on, you know, was like artists making art. I mean, obviously there were influencers and models and whatever and all that other stuff too, but I would say, like, for me at least, my experience of social media was always about like seeing cool art. And so it's just to say that, like, there is a way to balance that desire to find new support with your true voice and with what you are called to do. And there are people out there who understand humorous or playful work is deeply valuable. And if it's presented in the right way and in the right context, you'll find that humor is actually a very compelling reason why a lot of people want to collect artwork. So that's my thinking on that. That at the end of the day, you have to do what you do, and you have to find a way to make this all work for what you do.
That's brilliant. There is any other question, guys? Don't be shy.
Sarah, you mentioned that a collector kind of, I can't remember his name, Jason Bailey, um, was kind of like your sort of jumping off point, and like things kind of snowballed for you from there. Is there anything, if you were to go back in time to your like earlier in your career self, is there any advice that you'd give? Obviously, we don't really have control over, you know, finding that one collector and, you know, sparking things off from there. But is there advice you'd give to yourself, like over anything, or advice to not do for that matter, that in retrospect is kind of like what helped you get to that sort of explosion point, so to speak? I think you spoke on a few things already, but I'm just curious if there's anything else as well that you'd add to it. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's a little hard for me to answer because, again, when I got started with this, none of us knew how this worked yet. Like, we had to build how it worked. So, advice I might give to myself also sort of wasn't applicable at that time. Like, for example, like when I joined Super Rare in early April of 2019, I minted like 5 pieces on my first day. So like I technically have a Genesis token that was minted first, but I just minted 5 pieces because I thought of it like an online store, you know? Like we didn't have an understanding of what we were doing yet. And those practices of like, you know, maybe take your time with minting one of ones and try to sell them before you mint new ones, you know, stuff like that came later. So in a certain way, it's like I can't really give advice to my earlier self in that way, only because of how fast this space evolved. But one piece of advice I'd give that's kind of general and that I think would have applied to me back then, is just that you have to be. Oh, oh, okay. Is it? I don't.
I think you have your mic open.
Booked me. Okay. So what was I saying? So that the piece of advice I'd give that's sort of a general, just like a framework, just like a guideline to work with, especially as you're starting out, is that what you are looking to strike is the balance of making sales that are establishing your market without underselling yourself. And it is what, when I watch people jump in, it is what I always sort of, as both an artist and a collector and just a person who's fascinated by people, it's what I'm always curious to see. That it's kind of exciting, right? It's exciting that you're at the beginning of establishing a market around your work. And what I mean by that balance is that without making sales, there is no market. That if you mint 10 pieces and you don't sell a single one of them, there's no market yet, because until you make a sale, you have no what's called price discovery. It's a term in like finance for the letting the market determine what something is worth, right? And this is something I started to see with artists who came in later, people who maybe had big followings on Instagram or elsewhere, seeing their friends selling Genesis tokens for tens of thousands of dollars and coming in and making, minting their first piece and listing it at a really, really high price. And then it doesn't sell. It has no takers. And it's because I think artists don't consider the fact that while we all know Genesis tokens are really valuable, right? If it's an artist whose work is really valuable, then their Genesis token is even more valuable. But your Genesis token has no value if you're not an artist who's valuable, or if your market isn't it doesn't have value around it, right? Like nobody wants to collect the rookie card of a baseball player who like got injured and left the league in their first game. That sort of idea of a Genesis token only has value if that artist continues minting work, continues accruing collectors, and continues building a market around their work. So that's my advice to artists starting out. And again, it doesn't really apply to me at the beginning. I literally sold my first 3 pieces, I think, for like $30 each. But it's something I would say to any artist starting out, which is you're better off selling that first piece maybe a little lower than you would have ideally sold it for, but starting somewhere and establishing your market and bringing on a collector, you're better off with that than with that first piece sitting unsold because you priced it too high. And but by that same token, it's also that of like, don't be so hungry for those sales that you're underpricing your work. And the only way you find the sweet spot, again, is by trying. If you are, again, listing your things and they're selling immediately, that is an indication to you that your work might be a little bit underpriced. But as I was saying earlier, the answer is not immediately double your prices. You might want to try raising the price a little bit. And then when you hit that point where you notice, the work isn't selling quite as well now, that's your answer for, okay, that's the price discovery. That's where your work should be priced, right in that zone where it maybe doesn't sell out immediately, but it sells pretty well, And I'm saying all this again as a very high angle view. Every single person, every single artist is different. Your work is different. The demand for it will be different. And that is, I think, what trips a lot of people up, is there's a lot of comparing themselves with other people and going, well, they're doing so well and they're doing this and they're doing that. Why am I not doing so well? And as they say, comparison is the thief of joy. It's true across everything, that like comparing yourself to others is the quickest way to just feel like shit. But it's also in this space genuinely not the most valuable data for you, because like in my case, the work that I do, there are now a lot more people working with analog video and vintage tech, but for the first 2 years, there was like no one else working in the style I was working in. You couldn't compare my work to anyone else. And that's why it took a little longer for my work to develop a market like that. It took Jason Bailey, who you all might know as Art Gnome, it took him kind of saying to everyone, you need to understand the work she is doing is quite valuable. And so again, you get to that place by feeling it out and being okay with, at the beginning, you don't know what to do at the beginning. None of us do. You won't know what you're doing years in either. It's always a risk. Every time you release work into your market it is a risk. So the only thing you can do is think about it as best you can and just show that you're being thoughtful. Even if you don't always make the right moves, just show that you're being thoughtful and you're not just chasing the money. And that will help guide you.
Appreciate that. And to sort of to hop onto something else that you were saying, like I've always seen your work as and I've heard you describe it too as being this sort of visual, very analog. But I've also heard you describe yourself as a writer, which is obviously very different than using, analog video and that sort of thing to produce stuff. Is that through like your blog? Is it through writing to support the visual work that you also consider yourself a writer? And to add on top of that, is that something that you would consider like one of the crucial sort of practices of yours that helps to establish your market? Curious about the writing side of things as well.
Yes. That's a very interesting question. I'm trying to think how best to answer that. Yeah, I'm a writer in the sense that I've written many scripts, y'all. Like I've written many things that have and nothing yet which has ever made it fully to the screen beyond I collaborate with my spouse. We have an animation studio called Yo Merrill. So we've made a number of short animations, and we used to do a lot with an outlet called Super Deluxe, if you ever followed them. And
Super Deluxe, love them.
yeah, so we did a lot of animated shorts for Super Deluxe, and in that context, like my spouse is an incredible animator, so I really was in the role of like writer director there, and to that end, for me, it's actually it's like one of the grand sort of like struggles of my life is that I'm multidisciplinary, that it would just be so convenient to be able to fit myself into a box in like all things, and yet I cannot help but be sort of like as expansive as I am. Um, and that's why even when I prefaced this whole talk by saying I'm known for my analog video work, like that is really not the entirety even of my visual art practice. But it is what I have found. It's really important to be consistent when you are developing a market, right? Like I like to think you want an equal amount of always keeping people surprised while also making sure they know it's your work as soon as they see it, that's been very important to me in this whole time of like, I work in a number of different styles within that framework of like digital analog video. But I like every time I come out with something that people are kind of like, oh, what's it going to be? That's not going to just be kind of like a variation on the exact same thing. So it's to say that for me, for a very long time, my writing and my art were separate, right? They were these like very separate practices, and I was writing essentially in obscurity, because while I've blogged in the past and while I've written some articles and essays and things that have been published in the past, I am primarily a dramatic writer, meaning that I write, I want to write, I do write for the screen and stage. That's just how I express myself as a writer. And so the grand sort of the grand suffering of someone who writes in that way is that until that work gets produced, it sits unread, and I have drawers and drawers and drawers full of scripts that that remain sort of stillborn and have never sort of gotten there. But that background I have in screenwriting and that knowledgeability I have around cinema and storytelling and narrative and myth, I think are huge foundations to my visual art. I'm very referential to myth and story in my work. And that is, interestingly, I think what I am seeing just personally, I'm reaching this moment that this sort of mythical moment I've talked about now for about 10 years to anyone who would listen, which is that, yes, my art and my writing are separate, but there will come a moment where they where they do completely merge, I think. And I think I'm very close to that moment for various reasons. Yeah, it's fun. It's just a funny aspect of being so involved in this space and sort of having made a name for myself in this space is the flattening aspect of it, that people have this understanding of you that is like, the very quick takeaway understanding of she is Sarah, she works with VHS. Um, but yeah, there's this whole other side of me and whole other part of my practice as a creative person that is the thing I educated myself in, the thing that I for a very long time was professionally pointed at, that now is sort of uh, taken a back seat to my visual art, which is what I always did just for fun and just to play. I've always made art my entire life, and I don't know, I guess there's something to that, right? That the thing that I do that's I'm much less precious about and much more free with is, funny enough, the thing that is now very much my career.
Love it. Thank you. And would you say that the blog posts that you write for most of your releases are they an integral? Would you consider them an integral part of the work, or are they more just supportive in what you are putting out in a truly just purely visual sense?
Yeah, it's a great question. I view them as supporting documents, definitely. I am of the feeling that art should be able to be understood or experienced without explanation, first and foremost. I think that is the ideal anyway that I ascribe to, that my art can be experienced without it needing to be explained, without me needing to, you know, tell people what I was thinking or why I made it that way. I find that I don't wish to be overly prescriptive, and because I'm a writer and because I'm so verbose, if I bombard people with too much explanation, then it robs them of their own experience of the artwork. Um, but by that same token, I think that supporting documents are hugely important for the context of art history, and um, which even as I say that makes me feel a little self-aggrandizing of but you also can't deny it's like if you're really going to build something that's important to the best of your ability, you want to help contextualize why you're doing what you're doing and what it means. And that's I view it that, yeah, I use my writing skills exactly to write these blog posts, and very often the blog posts are actually adapted from collectors' dossiers that I send out. I have a network of collectors, and I often prepare these dossiers for them whenever I'm releasing new work to give them sort of this first look and give them an understanding of the work. And then I like to make that information public once the art is minted and is available, as a way for anyone who's interested in my work, whether they're interested in purchasing it or just in experiencing it. It's a way to, again, to provide supportive context to the art.
I've never really heard of collector dossiers before. Was that something that kind of just happened organically, or was that something that was recommended to you?
A little bit of both. It's that, yeah, I'd had conversations and had heard of other artists kind of doing things like that. So I love to make up frameworks. Again, it's the part of me that is a writer and that is very well versed in how to construct narrative. That I developed my own way of having documents very similar to if you were to go to an art fair, and go to like a gallery's booth at an art fair. They often have PDF, or they call them PDFs, but if you actually go to a fair, you can get actual like printouts of them. But these PDFs, when art dealers are trying to sell work, they often have PDFs that explain the artwork or have an artist statement or the artist bio and the sales, the information that's like the sales estimate or the price. So yeah, I've just developed my own framework for doing that. What I would say about that is that it is a practice that becomes valuable once you reach a certain point in your journey, when you do have, you know, a lot of people that are interested in your work. Um, what I would say about it with like sending things to collectors, especially in that way where you're kind of like saying, "Hey, this is, you know, hey, this is my thing. Would you like to buy it?" I'm sure many of you have heard the term shilling, and look, we all have to put our work out there. We all have to do the uncomfortable thing of telling people we have something for sale, how much it costs, et cetera, et cetera. It's to say that this is a framework I found that works well for me, but even for me, I'm sort of, it's everything's always in flux, everything's always developing. I would just I would say that again, it's one of those things that it's been working for me, but I don't know that it would necessarily work for everyone. And I do think that there is a very, very fine line between fostering a meaningful exchange, meaningful dialogue with a collector, and shilling. And you do have to be careful that you don't make people feel like you're that you're just trying to like turn them upside down and shake them and see if their money will fall out of their pockets. So, but the blog post aspect of it, the aspect of like developing a pattern of how you release your work, how you explain the work when you release it, so that people know what they can look for, know again whether they want to buy it or if they just want to see it and experience it and understand it. I think having these methods that you get the work out there and get, again, supporting documents or supporting information out there is also of huge value, like culturally.
It sounds like something that happens a bit more organically once you get to that stage. Thank you. That actually is super helpful. Appreciate it.
Do we have any other question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna like shoot my shot here and see like, essentially what I'm gonna ask is like, are you open to one-on-one mentorship? Because I really like the way that you speak and the way that you, I don't know, there's just something about the way that you speak that really, I can't really describe it, but yeah, are you open to that sort of thing, or are you a little bit too busy nowadays?
Well, first, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. I am not open to one-on-one mentorship. I am, yes, I'm very much in a place right now where I am sort of reckoning with some of the pain points in my own practice and my own time commitments. So it's to say that no, at this moment I'm not, but I thank you for your interest, and I send you like all the psychic support that I can.
Thank you. Yeah, it's no problem. I just figured I figured that it would be like a far shot, but I figured I'd ask, just for the chance.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, great. Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much. It's been really great so far. So you referred to yourself as the VHS girl earlier, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, as you're building kind of a market for yourself. This is something that I particularly struggle and just ask myself questions about, which is, I work across a variety of different formats and mediums, and the work is not necessarily easily identifiable as mine. Um, and it seems like, the NFT space is ripe with just there's a need to build some sort of a consistency, a medium or a format. So I'm just curious to hear how do you kind of maintain, how do you, I guess, allow, at least for me, I usually follow ideas or themes that I'm interested in, regardless of the medium, um, or even aesthetic. So I'm curious to kind of hear how you navigate, I guess the pressure to have one identity or one sort of brand versus, following the kind of work that you're interested in. And you talked about, your dramatic writing.
And so you've worked across different fields. So I'm just curious to kind of hear your thoughts and maybe guidance on all of this.
Sure, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. And you are correct to assess that consistency is absolutely rewarded in this space. And this is what I was speaking to a little bit earlier. That for me, at the beginning, I knew my breadth of practice and sort of the difficulty of putting my work in a box. I knew that that meant it would take me longer to develop a collector base, and it would take me longer to sort of like develop my identity within the space. And again, that goes back to like doing what you're called to do. Like change you, like come here and let it alchemize what you're already doing to be more robust as best you can. Uh, and that means, uh, don't completely ignore what's going on. It's good. You have to take in the feedback of what you're seeing in the space, and at least if you want to have success with this, um, but also don't give in to that little devil on your shoulder that's like, why don't you just put a Bitcoin logo on it? Then it'll sell. And yeah, so consistency is absolutely rewarded, but I'm probably a good example of someone who has shown that you can make the thing you are consistent with be that you are consistently multifarious. And in my case, as I was saying earlier, I don't only work with analog video, right? And a huge part of my practice and why my work is recognizable and stands out from maybe other analog video practices is that a lot of what I do is digital, is cutting edge, is using very advanced technologies in conjunction with these vintage technologies. And so at the beginning of my practice, I was working a lot with like neural style transfer and stereoscopic photography because my background originally, I was a photographer before I really got into digital and screen-based art. And if you look at a lot of my early mints, you'll see not everything I minted was analog video, right? And so what I'd say to you is like, if you're at the beginning of this journey, you actually have this incredible gift, which is that there's no expectations for you yet, right? And so you are allowed to be a little more experimental at the beginning of your journey. Not that you're not always allowed, you're always allowed to do whatever the hell you want. But what I mean by that is like you don't already have collectors who expect certain things from you. You can kind of try things out and see what works. And you might find, as I did, as you start seeing, oh, this one certain style I work in tends to sell really well, and these other styles maybe aren't landing the same way or aren't developing the same kind of interest. And you might decide to go, you know what, I'm going to just lean into that one style. In my case, working with analog video, I mean, it's really it's not like a restrictive definition, right? Like my subject matter and even my style, like some of the work I do is very abstract and structural. Some of the work I do is very narrative. Some of the work I do is almost like illustrative and cartoonish. Like I have identified 4 different strains within my body of work. And over the years, through this process of editioning my work, I have actually been able to name those strains and kind of like make those heighten the collectability of these different types of work, right? And so again, at the beginning it was all a bit more amorphous, but as time has gone on and as I've been in this sort of dialogue and dance with my collectors, that things emerge, right? And what you might find helpful is even to say, then maybe you'd be better off working like on a project-oriented basis, where instead of saying, hi, I am this artist and here's the art I do, you might find it helpful to create a container around each of those different styles or projects of going, this is this project where I work with this type of technology and this type of aesthetic. and give it its own account and give it its, you can create your own little microcosm, of your work. If you find that it's really like so incredibly disparate that it's not aesthetically recognizable. I mean, it's not my place to tell you what to do, but that's kind of what comes up for me if that were how I was working, that maybe it would be helpful to think about it in that way, to create containers around it like that, so that you don't feel that pressure to flatten yourself as an artist into just being one thing and one style. But the trade-off, of course, then is that each thing then has to be built on its own. And again, that journey might take longer or might be a little more work, but you might find in time that it'll really pay off and allow you to move the way you want to move.
Thank you. That was really helpful, and it's sort of how I've been sort of constructing it all. So it's great to hear your feedback. So one more question is actually coming forward as you're speaking, which is, it sounds to me like there's a depth of discourse and dialogue that goes behind your work. And, I think sometimes my experience of the NFT space is it can be really quick and it can be really shallow. And so I'm wondering, as you're speaking, to what degree, let's say, the people that are collecting your work, do they fully understand what's behind it? What's behind the kind of the thought process? And so I'm curious, you talked about your writing, but I'm curious how you navigate kind of the depth versus shallow spaces in this context.
Yeah, I mean, yes, there are many different kinds of creatures moving in this virtual space that we are moving in. And right, the question of depth versus shallowness. I mean, I know what you're referencing. I understand, and yes, it's a very fast-paced space. It's a market. Again, this is what I find I often point out to people who ask me if they should get involved in NFTs, is sort of like, well, it depends, like, are you at a place with your practice where you feel you should be starting a market for your work and that's the right call, or is it that you're just looking for a community, for your work, to share your work and to see your work? There are a lot of different ways to answer that question, right? And so this question of depth and shallowness, I mean, sales in a market are inherently not deep. And there are many different reasons why people buy things. And at the end of the day, you just have to develop that for yourself. And I've developed, these are questions I ask myself all the time of like, why am I doing this? And what's the end goal? What's the purpose? What does it mean? And by the same token, I think artists, we have a bad tendency to talk ourselves out of just accepting a good thing when it comes to us. So I think to some extent, just like, if people want to support you, let them support you. I think it's maybe you're overthinking it if you want to put all these qualifications on it. It's also comes down to like control and recognizing like you are not in control of everything. You're really only in control of what you put out there. So I feel very confident and very I feel good about what I've put out into the world. I feel good about how I present my work. And it's that as time has gone on and opportunities do come to me, it's part of what influences my decision making, right? Of like, this develops more and more, I do want my art to be seen for how I see it and what I feel it's worthy of being seen as. And so I make decisions about what I participate in based on my ideals, and that's to each of us to do that. That it's not to say you always get it right. Sometimes you just have to try things and see and go out on a limb. But I think it's that. It's that it's the flip side of that also is to remind yourself if your work isn't selling, it doesn't mean anything about the quality of your work. It only means something about the market, maybe your market, but maybe even just the greater market at large. So it's that as best you can. You can't tie your sense of self-worth to something as vulgar as a market. So it's that. It's like do good work, stand by it, always be pushing yourself to do better in terms of what it is you wish to put in the world. And yeah, and it's that. Just you only answer to yourself really at the end of the day. And you can't control what others are doing. So as best you can, you have to just tend your own garden, take care of yourself and what you're doing, and try to tune out the noise.
Thank you. That was really great. Thank you.
I think we have time for one last question. I don't know, Sarah, if you are okay with that.
Yeah, I can do one more if anyone's got a spicy one for me. Or not. We can also just be done. That's also fine.
I've got one, but it's not really art related if we want to end it off on a lighter note.
Lay it on me.
I just wanted to know what it was like winning a episode of Jeopardy.
I mean, it felt great. I mean, I can't deny it felt great. It's one of those funny things where, like, I mean, I had to be there to film it, like, all day, but, like, it's 22 minutes, you know? An episode of Jeopardy is 22 minutes long, so, it felt real good, and, I got to spend that whole I filmed it on a Wednesday, and then I didn't go back to film my next episode until the following Monday, so there got to be about, 4 or 5 days there where I got to, like, walk around town being like, "People don't even know that I'm the reigning Jeopardy champion right now," and I felt like the cock of the walk, you know? So, I was, like, 27 and single, and so, yeah, it made dating really fun. It was a nice conversation starter, and, I met my spouse I think I met her between the moment when I filmed and when the episodes aired, so I think maybe I, in some way, have my Jeopardy triumph to thank for, making her go out with me. So, yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
Well, I think this is a great way to end our session. So thank you so much, Sarah, for your time. We covered a lot of very deep and interesting topics. So thank you so much, and I hope you guys all enjoyed this AMA. So have a nice day, and yeah, thank you so much again.
Thank you all for your questions and for tuning in. It was a delight.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was great. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you guys later.